Hello again. So, I'm weary. Is anyone else feeling worn out by the state of the world? Okay, I figured it wasn't just me. Pretty much everyone I speak with, well, everyone who is aware and engaged feels the same. And the young people I work with, they are not just weary, some of them are just downright freaked out. I chose this title and theme, Another World is Possible, because when I am feeling this weary about life, I like to imagine alternatives. Some of them are out there. My brother and I had a text exchange about being orbs of light and flying squids. So that's maybe a little too far out there. But what I normally do is I imagine that somewhere in the multiverse, I, or all of us, are living a life that aligns more with our biology. Some Earth-centered ethos without nation states or borders, where community is paramount and we eat shared meals and play music and make art together. And we know that love is what matters most. And we talk, like really talk to one another. You get what I'm saying, right? Basically, I guess I imagine the antithesis of the world as it is for the most part. Now, sure, there are already some of these elements in this imagined world of mine already existing. Many of us live deeply into community, maybe even living communally instead of in separate houses or on our own property. I do hope, well, I know coffee hour covers that for lots of folks, but I do hope all of us get time to take meals with people we enjoy and love, and that we also tell them that we love them and enjoy being with them. And I firmly believe in not just the necessity of these communal experiences, but the power of them. It is in those times that I feel the most nourished, nutritionally and spiritually, and I feel cared for and seen, and I hope you all do too. But on a daily basis, I really wonder why and who and how it was decided that this life, this frenzied, overworked, undercared for, exploitative capitalist hustle culture is it. I was in Washington, D.C. last weekend, and I feel the need to pause and say, I felt like I was in a dystopian novel. There were 8-foot barricades surrounding the Capitol building. There were National Guards, people just roaming the streets in packs of 4. And there are parts of museums being removed and closed, right? So, okay. So that's very real. That was very, right? Anyway, I was down there as part of my work with the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History. As my bio said, I'm the co-chair of the broader Social Impacts Committee, which is a group of basically scientists, science educators, and people of faith or religious leaders who work together to find ways to engage the greater public in dialogue about evolution and the nature of human existence and our relationship to one another. Our website actually asks the question, what makes us human? And it's really fun to look at the answers, the variety, right? And when we're together, it's sort of like the setup for a perfect joke, like a rabbi, a UU minister, and a Mormon walk into a bar, but instead the bar stands in front of a display case full of skulls, right? So in any case, at our working dinner on the Sunday night, I turned to one of the lead paleontologists and the other paleoanthropologist who basically does all this. They do all the research in Kenya and China and even Romania, and they created the Hall of Human Origins. And I said, and I quote, I find it really hard to believe that the outcome of human evolution is working 60-hour weeks, having limited time with our families and friends, and focusing on making enough money to meet the cost of living, which in and of itself is a bizarre concept, and then being forced to eat unhealthy food on an unhealthy planet and dying with, about $100,000 of debt because we can't pay for health care. Okay. Right? That's grim. I get it. But, so I imagine that if the early hominids, let's say Australopithecus afarensis or Homo erectus, could see us now, what would they think? I imagine them saying, never mind. Let's not make too much progress, lest we end up like that. Right? But seriously, imagine the challenge of trying to find ways to bring conversations to communities with an attempt to cross huge divides in our understanding of evolution, of life, of humanity. I know it might be difficult for UUs to imagine that because as a whole, we include science and scientific knowledge and science literacy in our sources and our ways of knowing. We also include ancient texts and not so ancient texts, and we encourage learning and growth. We are, by our own evolution, interfaith. Not everyone digs into that part of our faith community, but at least it's there. What might set us most apart from many faith leaders from other faiths, is that since we don't have a creed or one single way of viewing the world, we can be flexible. This is a blessing and a curse. For the most part, that flexibility allows us to engage with multiple sources without rigid thinking. But sometimes that flexibility gets weaponized, and we poo-poo others whose worldview runs counter to ours. Sad but true, but I do believe that as UUs, we have a unique role in the world to be bridge builders. Especially now, living in these times, when we can't even talk about a book or a newscaster or a celebrity, we need bridge builders. We need imagination, and we need one another. So we had a bit of a fracas at Vassar a couple of weeks ago. Without going into details, although I'm sure if you Google it, you'd find it, I will simply say that we had a speaker invited to campus that the students were deeply troubled by. So they did what many of us have already done in our lives. They protested. Now, we all know that there are many ways to protest, and we are also aware that with each passing day, it is becoming more and more challenging and even dangerous to practice our right to assemble and protest. But disruption makes change happen. For their actions, the college responded in a very top-down manner. I like to use the phrase draconian disciplinary efforts, with threats of harsh disciplinary action. So I read the email that was sent to the entire campus, and I was incredulous. Whether I or anyone agreed with the students' methods seemed immaterial, because the greater learning, to me at least, was that they wanted things to change, and that speaker represented something they saw as problematic. So I waited a few days, really not sure how to respond, or even if I should, since I am on a renewable contract. But I am also a minister. So I finally sent an email to the higher-ups, like the president and the deans, and right. And because I was remembering that for another world to be possible, I have to help make it, right? So I'm not going to share the whole email, but I want to share two parts. So this excerpt helps me remember why we have to engage with one another and why we have to learn to imagine and create another way of living and being. So I wrote towards the end of the letter, I always ground myself in the beliefs that A, most of us communicate, act, and/or respond from places of pain and trauma. B, the prevailing structure of our world and our country is designed to silence, control, marginalize, and dehumanize as many beings as possible. And C, voices of dissent, whether done in ways we like it or not, are a necessary part of creating and sustaining a pluralistic, equitable society that values justice and acknowledges our interdependence. In other words, if we keep assuming that people who are protesting against injustice are problems, and if we keep silencing these folk, then we are giving up. We are saying, this is the only way the world works, so suck it up, buttercup, or something along those lines, right? So then I closed with this. The things I hear and the questions I am asked from the young people I spend my time with encompass fears about about what the future holds for them as our planet passes the tipping point to sustain life. Fears about parents or friends becoming desaparecidos, anger at systems that were put in place before they were born and that they have no ability to change due to our already fledgling democracy crumbling before their eyes. From my perspective, they have every right to be angry and every right to express that anger. Disruption leads to change, and there is not one way to practice protest or dissent. And then here's my zinger. Instead of punishing them, why don't we work toward hearing them, empowering them, and giving them the skills they need to foster societal change? I won't tell you the response I got. I still have a job, though. Okay, all right, so that's good. But what I wrote there is part of this another way. We have been repeatedly told that our system of government and economics and social structure is the best the world has ever seen, and thus we must ensure its reproduction. But I'm hoping that everyone here has at least once in our lives questioned that trope. I won't even call it a belief, it's a trope at this point. And have you ever examined it from the perspective of someone non-white or non-privileged in any way? Generational poverty is not an accident. Deliberate marginalization based on skin color, not an accident. Unequal pay, not an accident. Exorbitant healthcare costs, not an accident. All of these things actively hinder the full manifestation of someone's dignity. And that is not a world I want to live in any longer. So one way to start creating another world is to have conversations like that, those things we just talked about, the things I wrote in that letter, with people who are not like you. People maybe who are just getting by, or are suffering or lost. Or better yet, instead of a conversation, like our book says, just listen to their stories and see what you learn. For the past couple of months, I have been helping a teen mom from Guatemala who is seeking asylum and citizenship in the US. And the challenges she faces to try and get services, a job, or just this past week been trying to find an apartment that is safe for her baby who's already got lead poisoning from her current apartment are just non-stop. It doesn't matter how strong and smart she is, because she is. The system, as it stands now, just limits her potential. Now, I knew these things before I became her advocate, but working through that system with her made it very, very real. And many of us, maybe luckily enough, have no idea how bad it really is. So how do we address this? How do we change it? I don't know about you, but I feel like I've been asking that question for ages, and I love the idea that we've hit nadir and we're coming up, right? I'm gonna think about that every day because that's a hard time to hold on to that, right? Okay, so when I was studying with and being mentored by Dr. Betty Reardon, who is the founder of Peace Education Field in the United States, she always encouraged us to change the system from the inside. She would tell us, get jobs where you can enact change, even incremental change, but change nonetheless. And for most of my career, and certainly for the last 25 years, I've been trying to do that. My success, though, feels limited. I think at one nonprofit I ran, I was able to address some structural inequalities, but I have no idea if those impacts lasted beyond my time there. And every day as an educator, I function within a white supremacist hierarchical status quo serving elitist system, and do everything I can to point that out to students and discuss topics and articles that unpack these ideas. But I also teach in non-traditional ways, including having spiritual practices at the start of every class at a secular place, and knowing and using different epistemologies, ways of knowing and learning as part of my classes. And while I know from my students, or at least what they tell me when they write to me after they've graduated, that it's been transformational for them, I don't know if within the system is enough anymore. I don't know if it's been enough for even the last 25 years. I think Betty from Beyond the Grave might be mad at me for saying this, or maybe I'm just getting more radical in my old age, or maybe I've just been pushed to the limit now. But I think if we want to believe that another way is possible, we have to do it both within the current system, and perhaps more importantly, we have to create new systems. Maybe parallel systems that give alternatives to these soul-sucking options we appear forced to live with. And maybe thinking about it in a system is entirely wrong, right? Maybe it's going back to these ideas of circles of care or creative communities or collaborative models. I call it what you will, right? I think of the most successful things I've seen that have eschewed the system are mutual aid programs, certainly in where I live, or Ithaca bucks, like if you go to Ithaca, right? And we also have a local currency in the Hudson Valley, but it hasn't grown. And I've also seen and have friends who live in true communal living models. The aforementioned brother, right, lives in this communal thing and they all eat together and serve the community. And they're not just here, they're all over the world. We have models that we can explore. But also, the way that power and privilege operates today will also never change unless we do the work on a personal level, simultaneously with the communal. Like I think of it as like this, to sound academic, iterative process, right? Where we do one and it makes us interact differently and then we learn more and we keep, this like not an annoying gerbil on a wheel, but like a healthy gerbil on a wheel kind of thing. A gerbil that go, like if the wheel went off the rails, right? Okay, right. So, we have to decolonize ourselves, is what I'm saying. Meaning, we have to recognize that our prevailing beliefs and practices were implanted in us by unhealthy systems that were not grounded in valuing people or life or love, as our reading shared. Rather, those systems were grounded in valuing objects, like resources or humans treated as objects, valuing money and valuing power over. So another way requires us to see how that thinking, that exploitative colonial imperialist way of thinking, is actually part of us. And to see how we benefit from it and how we perpetuate it, even when we don't realize we are, because maybe we're not fully aware of how much we're perpetuating it. Maybe we need to look at how we run a congregation, how we treat employees, colleagues, or neighbors, how we prejudge someone when we meet them for the first time, or how we put our convenience before the needs of others. It's simple, but it's also demanding, like rethinking our place in the world and how we function in it. It may lead to different choices, and it might feel like a sacrifice, and it'll probably be uncomfortable. But if doing so means we're getting closer to a greater ideal, a more egalitarian way of living in the world, then isn't it worth it? Basically, this practice invites us to examine ourselves so we can lay out alternatives to the dominant paradigms. We may not know what depths of love and resources we have within ourselves until we kind of step out of the comfort. So one of the things I do for me, it's showing up like, this is really simple, but it's so amazing to watch young people's faces. Like, I always allow students to get an extension on work. I don't care. They can ask. Then they have to tell me when they're handing it in. I'm cool with that. Totally different than these deadlines. I also tell them that if you're not feeling well, mentally or emotionally or physically, don't come to class, right? I mean, we talk about really cool stuff, but the world's not going to change if you miss one day of class. It's better that you take care of you. That's not something I was taught when I was a kid, right? None of those things. I also feel like reminding them that, like, pushing yourselves to the brink of exhaustion. Oh, these kids are overachievers. I'm just going to say that. So I try to remind them, like, it's okay to take breaks, to rest, to take a walk. I mean, that's for all of us, right? I think half the time I make these rules for them because I wish someone had done that for me. And I want to tell another quick story, though, because the importance of dialogue and not kind of prejudging. So, yeah, I guess it was about a month ago, we had a big ice rally in Kingston. It was one of those like 14 Fahrenheit days, right? And lots of people showed up. And then there were a bunch of, for lack of a better way to put it, teenage white boys who were in their cars driving by and like revving their engines, like and honking horns to kind of like drown us out. And some of the protesters started just calling them names and stuff. I'm like, I've been doing this a long time, yo. We don't yell and call them losers. That doesn't help. That's not a dialogue, right? Like, that's what's done to us, right? And it's not this we go low or high. No, it's just that they don't understand maybe what we're doing. So let's greet them with curiosity and maybe some compassion, right? So some of those boys parked their car, got out of the car, and across the street, there was a man alone, right? All of us are in front of City Hall, and there's this one dude on the other side of the street. And he's got his flag upside down, and he's got a sign that says, ICE is the Gestapo, right? And so these 4 kids are over there talking to, kids, whatever. And I'm standing with a friend who's very tall, so I like having her around. And so she was like, I don't know if that guy's safe. I said, I'm not sure either. And so she starts to walk over, and then so me and another woman follow over. And these kids are like pretty much verbally attacking him. They're not being, violent or anything outside of their language, right? And so all 3 of us grab one of the kids, and then people have to leave. So then I ultimately stood in that shady spot. What was that guy thinking? For at least 25 minutes. And I had 4 separate conversations with each of those boys and asked them, what's your beef with this guy, right? And then they answered, and I said, yeah, I see that too. Like, I don't think people treat the flag kindly, but it's a symbol. What do you think about that? And we had this long thing so that by the end, I said to the kid, and he told me his father was a cop. I said, oh yeah, I got cops in my family, blah, blah, blah. Long story longer is that we met eye to eye on a couple things. And by the end of the conversation, he's like, all right, I'm still upset about the flag being upside down, but I think his sign is right. I said, okay, we got somewhere. So I moved on to the next kid and then the next kid and and I asked them questions. I found points of agreement and I just kept asking them more questions. Now, not for nothing, I was wearing the collar, so maybe they were taught to be a little respectful. I don't know if just, white-haired crazy lady on the street would have gotten that far, so maybe I just need to wear the collar all the time. I don't know. But there was something also in how I was speaking to them, because the man with the flag said, wow, that was really good. And I said, I'm trained, buddy. But there was something about it. But my favorite thing is at the end, the last fella I was chatting with, he starts to walk away, because we're freezing now at this point, right? He starts to walk away, and then he turns back and he says, put out his hand. He says, I'm Cam. And I said, I'm Reverend Leonisa. And we shook hands, and I said, go get warm. And then that was it. And I went to my car and shivered. But that was so profound for me. I've been doing that kind of stuff for years. I don't know what it was in that moment that felt so different, right? Because people were yelling and this and that, and then these teenage boys who were making trouble. Now, I don't know if they thought about that beyond that, but I like the fact that they heard another perspective, they got some reinforcement, and maybe they're thinking differently now. Maybe they're not going to be so quick to jump and honk their horns. We don't know, right? But it's a step. Okay, sorry for the digression, but I hope you like the story. Okay, I'm also thinking of other ways to start putting these seeds down. A lot of organizations, the ones I'm part of, including the UUA and congregations, use traditional hierarchical structures, president, vice president, right? And I've been thinking for years, even when I was at my congregation, what would it be like instead if we practiced collaborative leadership, like a sociocratic model, where different roles are rotated, right? That might model a different way of thinking and being. I also think about if we eschew materialism and consumerism and creating, I loved the clothing swap concept. I was like, what if we did that with snowblowers and coffee pots and, right, utensils and like a material library, an appliance library, right? Like a hub. And like not buying anything new because we already have everything on the planet that we need for like 6 generations. But it would also make us talk to each other because you could say, I got a big coffee urn, I need that, or how, right? Okay, you have these ideas. So An activity I do with people from ages 3 to older, I think the oldest was my own parents, so 84, is called I Envision a World. And it's really simple. You take a sheet of paper or a page in a notebook or your mind's eye right now, and you can draw or write a manifesto, I don't care what. The question and what matters is that you dream, you imagine, and you envision, right? So I envision a world where, and there's no parameters, just let it go. Let's just do it. I encourage you to write it down, even if things are popping up for you now. And then after you do the envisioning, think about what your role will be in making that vision a reality. I want to close by adding that our updated UU values are like an excellent place to start. These 7 values, if we lived into them, could easily bring about another world. And we, as I said, we as UUs can live into them, but we can talk to non-UUs and we can interact in, right, concentric circles of ripples of hope, of change, right? So think about it: justice, pluralism, transformation, interdependence, generosity, and equity. Those values are largely antithetical to the world we live in now. If we UUs can shift our own hearts and minds and our behaviors and actions to live fully into these values, we will be well on our way to creating another world. And of course, as our readings today reminded us, we have to remember the center. The root of it all is love. I know I want another world because I love this planet and I love the people I know and the people I don't know and the people I have yet to meet. It's all grounded in love. And maybe that's our greatest leap of faith, to believe that love is greater than all the muck and the yuck and the negativity. And as Che Guevara reminds us, at the risk of seeming ridiculous, let me say that the true revolutionary is guided by a great feeling of love. It is impossible to think of a genuine revolutionary lacking this quality. So may we be revolutionary and imaginative. May we live into our deepest values. May we envision another world and live it into being. May it be so.